So instead of dragging things in and typing, in this vertical format, I should be able to play the DAW and it should give me this middle row, meaning I should be able to type on the 10 key, possibly type an N if I want to type a chord. So I would type an N3I or something like that in order to type a chord, or you can do the drop down to do the chords. But if I just want individual notes, I should be able to just type them with a 10 key or the numbers on the normal keyboard, or assign keys on the keyboard to represent the notes. If I want to play in Ionian, then the 1 should be the Ionian, the lowest note. If I want to play in Phrygian, then the 3 should be the lowest note. All I have to remember is the 3 is now the lowest note, and I'm going to go 3 through 7, right? So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, the 1 and 2 will now be higher in pitch because the 3 is the tonic. So the middle row here does not represent middle C or C4 on the piano. It represents from the lowest pitch of the collection of notes that we have chosen to play in, and 12 notes up. I should be able to go back and forth. So still trapped in 12 notes, not 7 relative. So DAWs think in chromatic steps, not contextual scales. So the MIDI notes are assigned with numbers. Now these numbers are great for background numbers. They're not really what we want to memorize as musicians. There would be a better number system for us to number, which would be like the Nashville numbers, or an absolute number for the notes starting from 0 or 1 to 12. No concept of absolute number, modal position regardless of key. This is amazing that we have modern day computer systems that don't do this. They don't see it by relative position. We don't have the 2 dials then to be able to automatically tinker with our music by shifting or transposing automatically and rotating through the modal perspectives, changing the tonic upon rotation. So we can't rotate easily through the different modes, and it lacks mode-based transposition. So in other words, what we should be able to do, see how this song, I can represent this song as being something that's in the Ionian mode. Now notice, as I play, I'm going to have to tell the system, I could tell the system, look, I'm working in the collection of notes of C major or D major or whatever, and then I can assign the tonic. This one I'm going to imagine is in the Ionian, let's say C major. But if I write it this way, then I don't really know what key it's in terms of which collection of notes, because it's all relative. I can then put on top of this any collection of notes. That's the point. But if the Ionian was the tonic, then I can transpose this to any 12 collections of notes automatically without even having to rewrite this. If, in other words, I did this by hand, this is the way I would write modern sheet music, right? You would write it not referring to the note names, but rather to the relative position, naming the chords by relative position, as well as the Nashville numbers representing individual notes for, say, a melody, because then you don't have to rewrite it to change different keys. You just say, no, now we're going to be playing it in the collection of notes of D major. Now E major, this is a G major. I don't need to rewrite anything. So it transposes automatically. The computer can, of course, do that automatically transposition and rewrite it if, at least in the background, it has this information. You could still write it normally, but this would kind of like be in the background. And it should be able to rotate from a modal perspective. So see, this is an Ionian, and this is a 1 for the Ionian. It should be able to rotate it now the Dorian. So if I went from Ionian to the related Dorian, it should just be able to make that rotation automatically. Now, if the Dorian is now it, and it's D Dorian, then the Dorian should be the lowest note in this row, right? This row has the Dorian's the lowest note, the 2 is the lowest note, the 1 is going to be higher in pitch than the 2, right? And then I can go to the Phrygian. So now I have a 3-note Phrygian, which is snapping into place here, which is a minor mode, which will have a minor third instead of a major third for the Ionian. And the 3 is now the lowest note in this collection or in this row. And then I go to the 4. So now the 4, or Lydian, is the lowest note in this collection of notes, and the relative positions are moving up. From a chord stacking standpoint, I should also be able to expand this if I wanted to. This is the same information back to the C major, where the C is the lowest note, and we're building up from here. These are the chords that are stacked, and these are the collection of notes that were represented in a Nashville number. The key over here is that we have the notes. This is all that's in a normal MIDI system, the notes, and then this numbering system, which is the behind the scenes for the computer. But we should have another relative position, meaning the Nashville numbers. See these Nashville numbers 1 through 7, the 0.5s representing the 5 notes that are outside the collection, which I can make a permanent Nashville number system, meaning they keep on going up, right, and down in pitch so that they represent octaves. So that means if I rotate this from a C to a D, I can just rotate it on this dial. Now, if I want to rotate it up to a D up here and keep it in a C in a major scale, everything would rotate up here in a relative position. The current systems should be able to do that. You should be able to rotate everything up because they would just shift everything up. But the modal system should be doable as well, meaning I can shift everything up to a D. Now I'm at the D instead of the C, and everything's going up from here. But instead of just having this from a D major perspective, this dial over here is still on the Dorian, meaning it's the related Dorian. It's the related Nashville number 2 to C majors 1. So it's not the same pattern going up because now it's being mapped out from the Dorian's perspective, the Dorian now being the lowest note. And then if I go to the next one, this could go up to the E. Now, if this 3 over here was the 1, then I would be looking at it from an E major, meaning just transposing the information. But I should be able to shift this dial to say, no, I want to look at the relative 3, which is the Phrygian. So now I'm on E Phrygian. The E is now the lowest note, and all the chords have been adjusted, and the notes have been adjusted to fit into, from this perspective, just rotating everything up. So that's the idea. So basic chords should be modular, not stacked notes. So why can't I just enter a C major 7 or a 1, 3, 5, 7? In other words, when I'm entering information into the system, I would like to not have to stack individual notes, but type it in there by relative Nashville number or the nodal points, or the actual note chord name, or possibly a chord name that doesn't refer to the C, right? So it would just be an Ionian, a 4-note Ionian chord, right? Because that would be the idea of it. And by doing that, then again, once I type everything into the system, I can reread it, and I can tell if something is a standard chord or if it's not, if I have it in one row layout. So I can read something and say, oh, here's a chord, here's a singular note, here's a note that doesn't fit in a normal chord shape, it's been stacked on top of a chord or something like that. So you must manually input each pitch currently. There's no way to enter the chords. You could maybe have a drop down that enters the chords, but it'll still be entered in a stacked system, so you won't be able to go back and read the chords from a chord perspective. You'll have to be able to see the stacking and then know what chord that is. So there's no modular logic layout, no easy way to apply a chord shape. So again, what I'd like to be able to say is condense this down to one row so that I can see the chords. In other words, whether I write it in a stacked format, 12 notes per octave, or I condense it down to one row, I should be able to expand it or contract it. When I contract it down to one row, this chord now is recognizable. I could write it as just a C major chord if I was in the collection of notes around the C. So then I can recognize these as chords. Whereas if it's stacked, I can't recognize it as a chord, right? It's going to be a lot harder for most people to see this and say, oh, what kind of chord is that? What is that, right? They might have been able to know when they wrote it in there, but they're not. But if I'd like it to be able to say, now I can condense it and say, oh, now I can see these are normal chord structures because I can see the chord names. All right. Now, one more thing I just want to point out. You might be saying, what about modern music like jazz or something, which changes modal perspective and the collection of notes all the time? That should also be something that we should be able to do, meaning this part of the song, I'm looking at one chord, one set of notes, or looking at it from one perspective of the collection of notes, and one modal perspective like the Ionian. And this collection might be the same collection of notes, but maybe I'm looking at it from the perspective of the Dorian. And this part might be in a whole different collection of notes in like the Lydian or something like that. I should be able to assign a collection of notes as well as a modal perspective to each piece of the song, which then allows me to rotate the entire song, transpose it, the entire thing, and or look at each section and transpose it or rotate it through all the modal perspectives, kind of like a Rubik's Cube, but in such a way that makes musical sense. The ability to tinker then with the song in a way that makes musical sense, going up massively. That's how it's designed to work. That's how we should be able to tinker with things in a DAW system these days.